I was the first one to notice the ladders. Not because they were hidden, there was nothing subtle about them, but because my brain refused to process what it was seeing. The trees alone were already pushing the limits of plausibility. Trunks like city towers, bark ridged and layered like petrified skin, their canopies vanishing into a pale green haze so high above us that the sun fractured through them in slow, drifting beams. But ladders. "Eli," I said into my helmet, stopping dead in the middle of the avenue. "Tell me you see that." He stopped beside me, boots crunching against the thick mat of fallen leaves that felt more like cured leather than plant matter. We stood shoulder to shoulder, staring up. The ladder was carved directly into the trunk. Each rung was a shallow, rectangular cut, evenly spaced, worn smooth at the edges. It rose straight up the tree's face and disappeared into the fog. Eli tilted his head back until his visor caught the light. "That's not erosion." "No," I said. "That's use." We'd named the place the Avenue because of the way the trees grew. Parallel rows stretching for miles like an intentional corridor. No underbrush, no fallen giants blocking the way, just a long, open path beneath trunks so wide you could have parked our lander inside one if it were hollow. "This wasn't in the probe scans," Eli said. "The probes couldn't resolve individual features at this scale," I said automatically, repeating mission briefing language that suddenly felt thin. "They flagged the planet as uninhabited." Eli reached out and placed a gloved hand against the bark. The tree didn't react, no movement, no vibration, but the surface was warm, not sun warm, body warm. "Uninhabited by what?" he asked. We followed the ladder to its base. At ground level, there were impressions in the soil, deep ones, long strides, not footprints so much as compressed zones where something heavy had stood repeatedly. Eli knelt, running a scanner over one, his silence stretched. "Well?" I asked. He stood slowly. "If I'm reading this right, whatever made these weighs about 30 times more than our rover." I swallowed and looked up again. Above us, far beyond the fog, something shifted. Not a branch. Something that moved with intent. And for the first time since landing on Kepler 442c's third moon, it occurred to me that the ladders weren't there for climbing up. They were there so someone could come down. "Oh," Eli said my name, sharp and low, the way you say it when you don't want the world to hear. "Back to the lander," he whispered. I didn't argue. We both knew better than to run. Running draws attention. But there's a difference between moving calmly and standing under something that might decide to notice you. We turned in unison, boots finding the same careful rhythm, and started back down the avenue. The ground thudded. Not close, not yet, but heavy enough that the vibration traveled up through my legs and rattled my teeth inside my helmet. Eli froze. That wasn't us. Another thud. Closer this time. The air shifted. Leaves, each one the size of a mattress, trembled overhead, shedding a fine dust that drifted down like pollen snow. I forced myself to keep walking. "Don't look up," I said, even as every instinct screamed to do exactly that. We made it maybe 50 meters before a shadow slid across the avenue ahead of us, cutting the light like an eclipse. The temperature dropped a few degrees instantly. Eli broke first. He looked. "Oh," he breathed. I looked too. Between two of the trunks, something vast lowered itself into view. Not fully, just enough. A hand, if you could call it that. 5 thick digits, each wider than my torso, the skin textured like stone smoothed by centuries of weather, fingernails the size of shuttle wings, blunt and cracked. It rested against the bark of a neighboring tree, casual, familiar. A voice followed. Not loud, not booming, just deep, resonant, and impossibly close, like it was speaking inside the avenue itself. "Small ones," it said. The translator lagged for half a second, then caught up, feeding the words into my helmet with a faint electronic echo. Eli's hand found my arm. His grip was tight enough to hurt. "We didn't mean to trespass," he said, voice steady in a way I knew cost him effort. "We're explorers. We'll leave." The fingers flexed. Bark peeled away where it touched, not from force, but from scale. "Leave," the giant repeated, tasting the word. "You came down the path." "This path?" I asked before I could stop myself. The hand shifted, pointing, down the avenue, past us, deeper into the rows. "Our avenue," it said. "For walking, for thinking." Eli swallowed audibly. We saw the ladders. A pause, long enough that my heart started hammering. "Yes," the giant said. "You saw them." Something moved higher up the trunk. The fog thinned for a moment, and I caught a glimpse of an eye, vast, dark, reflecting the trees like a forest within a forest. "Why do you climb?" it asked. I opened my mouth. Then the ground shook again, harder than before, multiple impacts, out of rhythm with the first. The giant's eye shifted, focusing past us. "Ah," it said, almost fondly. "Others are coming." Eli's voice dropped to a whisper. "That doesn't sound like curiosity." "No," I said. Behind us, deeper in the avenue, more shadows fell across the path, overlapping, moving, alive. The ladders creaked, and high above, something began to descend. The sound came first. A slow, deliberate thump. Scrape. Thump. Like stone meeting wood, followed by the faint groan of bark under stress. I craned my neck despite myself, eyes tracking the ladder as it disappeared into the fog. The rungs vibrated with each movement, shedding thin curls of wood that spiraled down like shavings from a carpenter's plane. Eli keyed his mic, then stopped. There was no one to call. No cavalry waiting just beyond orbit. Whatever happened here would be handled at ground level, by us. A foot emerged. It was massive, broad, and bare, the sole hardened and ridged like the underside of an ancient bridge. It found a rung, tested it with patient confidence, then shifted its weight. The tree didn't bend. It accepted it. "Careful," the first giant said mildly. "They break when rushed." Another voice answered from above, higher pitched, almost curious. "They are very small." "Yes," the first replied, "and very breakable." My stomach clenched. The second giant descended another rung, then another. Its head pushed through the fog, features resolving slowly. A face like weathered granite, eyes pale and reflective, hair hanging in thick cords that brushed the trunk as it climbed. It smiled. Not cruelly, not kindly, as if amused by a puzzle. "Are they animals?" it asked. Eli didn't wait for me this time. "We're people," he said. "Like you. We think." The smile faded slightly. "They think." "Most things do," the first giant said. "That doesn't make them neighbors." I took a breath, forcing myself to speak around the tightness in my chest. We followed the open path. We thought it was natural. The giants were silent for a moment. Around us, more shapes resolved in the fog, figures leaning against trunks, sitting on massive branches, peering down between leaves. The avenue wasn't empty. It was populated. "This is where we walk," the first giant said again, slower now. "Where we come down to remember the ground. You walk here too. That makes you noticeable." The second giant crouched, bringing its face closer. Its breath smelled green, like sap and rain. "You climbed nothing," it said. "Why?" I glanced at the ladder, then back at them. We didn't know what it was for. That seemed to interest them. "Not knowing," the second giant murmured. "That is a reason." A deep rumble echoed down the avenue as another giant stepped fully into view behind us, blocking the path back to the lander. Not threatening, just present. Eli shifted closer to me. "If we leave now," he said carefully, "we won't come back." The first giant tilted its head, considering. "No," it said, "you won't." My heart sank. Then it added, "But you may go." Relief hit so hard my knees nearly buckled. "There is a rule," the second giant said. For small walkers. Name it, Eli said quickly. The giant pointed upward toward the ladders, vanishing into the canopy. You must not climb, it said, and you must not teach others that the ladders exist. I nodded. Agreed. The first giant stepped aside, opening a gap just wide enough to pass through. As we moved, it spoke one last time, voice carrying through the trunks. This world is tall, it said. If you return, remember which direction things grow. We didn't run until the avenue disappeared behind us. And even then, as the lander sealed and lifted away, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere far below the canopy, giants were still walking, careful not to step on the small things that had learned, just in time, how to look up. I was still thinking about that sentence when the alarms went off. Not the panicked kind, not decompression or hull breach. A soft, insistent chime, the one reserved for external anomalies. The kind you only get when something large, slow, and deliberate is matching your ascent. Tell me that's debris, Eli said, already pulling up the external cameras. I didn't answer. I was too busy staring at the telemetry. Our altitude was climbing. Our velocity was steady. And something below us was keeping pace. The feed snapped on. At first, it was just fog and canopy, the tops of those impossible trees receding as we punched through the upper atmosphere. Then the fog parted. A hand rose into view, not reaching for us, not grasping, following. The fingers brushed the hull, lightly, experimentally, and I felt it through the deck, a pressure like someone testing a railing. No impact warning, no damage report. Eli's voice dropped to a whisper. They shouldn't be able to reach this high. They built ladders, I said. Why wouldn't they build more? The hand fell away as the atmosphere thinned, but the camera kept tracking downward, pulled by something neither of us wanted to name. Along the trunks, dozens, hundreds of ladders caught the light, some old and worn, some fresh pale wood still raw at the edges. They weren't confined to the avenue. They were everywhere. The comm crackled. A voice came through, faint, distorted by distance and medium, but unmistakably the same deep resonance we'd heard below. You leave the ground, it said. That is allowed. Eli stared at the speaker. That's impossible. You leave, the voice continued, but you look back. The signal weakened, stretched thin. Do not bring the small ones who climb for hunger. The transmission cut. Silence flooded the cockpit. We didn't speak until we hit orbit. When command asked for our report, we followed protocol. We described a megaflora-dominated biosphere, non-hostile megafauna, no signs of tool-using civilization. We flagged the moon as low priority for further exploration due to environmental hazards and poor resource yield. They accepted it without question. Weeks later, alone in my quarters, I replayed the footage one last time, freezing on a single frame. High above the canopy, where the ladders should have ended, there was something new carved into the bark. Not a rung. A symbol. Simple. Deliberate. An arrow. Pointing up. I stared at the arrow until the screen dimmed itself. I told myself it was erosion. A trick of shadow. Pareidolia. The brain inventing meaning where none existed. That was easier than admitting what it actually felt like, an invitation that had learned patience. Command reassigned us within a month. New system, new rock, normal scale. Eli pretended the whole thing rolled off him, joked about finally working somewhere where the trees don't look back. I laughed when appropriate. I slept. I ate. I did everything you're supposed to do when something impossible is over. Except it wasn't. It started with updates to the stellar maps. Minor corrections at first, LiDAR anomalies, vertical structures misclassified as geological noise. Analysts blamed sensor drift, then software interpolation errors. Nobody wanted to be the person who filed a report suggesting architecture where none should exist. I recognized the shapes immediately. Parallel lines, regular spacing, Long, narrow paths cutting through otherwise chaotic terrain. Avenues. I flagged the data and forwarded it to Eli with a single line. Tell me I'm wrong. He didn't respond for 2 days. When he finally did, it was just, they're not all on that moon. After that, things accelerated. Exploration drones went missing on forest worlds, always last transmitting while ascending. One probe sent back a final image before signal loss, the underside of a massive hand, palm etched with old scars and newer carvings, symbols repeating, variations on the same arrow, pointing away from the ground, pointing toward orbit, toward us. The official stance hardened. No panic, no announcements, just quiet reclassification, redacted files, routes adjusted to avoid vertical biospheres. Someone higher up decided that if you didn't name a thing, it couldn't become a problem. I understood the logic. I also understood how ladders work. They aren't weapons. They aren't defenses. They're infrastructure. Months later, while reviewing a routine orbital scan over an uncharted super-Earth, I saw it again, etched into a mountainside so vast it bent the horizon. An avenue, carved not through trees this time, but stone. And along it, impossibly small from this distance but unmistakable in intent, a sequence of evenly spaced cuts climbing toward the sky. I leaned back in my chair, heart slow and heavy. They weren't chasing us. They were learning how to follow. And somewhere, on a world too tall for us to comprehend, giants were walking carefully, building ladders not because they needed to climb, but because one day they intended to arrive. The first arrival wasn't announced. There was no alarm, no warning flare, no panic transmission screaming that something impossible had breached the rules. It happened the way all large truths do, quietly, in a place nobody important was looking. A refueling station at the edge of surveyed space stopped responding. Not destroyed, not damaged, just unresponsive. Power draw normal. Life support cycling, docking clamps open, as if waiting for a ship that never arrived. They sent a drone. The drone's feed lasted 12 seconds. In that time, it showed the station's outer ring bent inward, not crushed, not torn, reshaped. The metal curved with the soft confidence of something molded by hands that understood scale differently. Along the hull, etched into the alloy with precise, careful pressure, were marks. Rectangular, evenly spaced. Ladders. The final frame caught a shadow moving past the station, blocking the stars. Something vast, silhouetted against the black, its outline wrong not because it was monstrous, but because it was upright. Command buried the footage, classified it so deeply that only people like me, people who had already seen the avenue, were allowed to know it existed. Eli and I were called in together. A small room, no windows, a table too light for the conversation it was meant to hold. "They are not hostile," the director said, hands folded. "Not yet." "They told us not to bring climbers," I said. The director looked up. "Climbers." "Those who climb for hunger," Eli said quietly. "For resources. For conquest." Silence. "They see us the way we see extractors," I continued. "Strip miners, expansionists, things that arrive, take, and leave scars." "And what do they see themselves as?" the director asked. I thought of the avenue, of giants walking slowly, carefully, mindful of what lived beneath their feet. "Landmarks," I said, "caretakers, the tallest thing in a world that grows upward." The director exhaled. "They're building structures in orbit." "Not structures," Eli corrected. "Steps." The meeting ended without resolution. It always did. Politics can't move at the speed of inevitability. 3 weeks later, the first ladder reached vacuum. It didn't pierce space like a spear. It rested there, anchored to nothing we could measure, each rung etched from a material that bent light just slightly, as if refusing to be fully understood. No weapons followed. No fleets. Just a single figure, climbing. It stopped when it reached the top rung and looked around, at the stars, at the scattered lights of human presence, at the thin, fragile web we'd spun across the dark. The transmission came then, broadcast on every band we used and several we didn't. "You are very high," the voice said, "but not the highest." There was no threat in it. Only observation. Only patience. And somewhere deep in my chest, the old understanding settled back into place. The universe wasn't empty. It was vertical. And we had finally reached the part where things start to look down.